The air inside the assembly hall was heavy, almost sacred. 200 soldiers stood in flawless formation, their uniforms pressed so sharp the fabric seemed to cut the light. The sound of boots striking the polished floor moments earlier had already faded, leaving behind a silence that buzzed with anticipation. Then the doors opened. General Robert Caldwell entered, his medals catching the pale October sun spilling through high windows. The room reacted instantly. 200 arms rose like a single machine, hands slicing upward in perfect salute. A display of discipline, of loyalty, all except one. At the very back of the hall, just beyond the shadows cast by the memorial wreaths, Emma Blackwell did not move. Her hands remained at her sides. Her back was straight, her eyes locked on the general with a steadiness that made even seasoned sergeants shift uncomfortably. She wore not the crisp blues of ceremony, but a faded maintenance uniform smeared faintly with grease. Out of place, out of step. And yet, there was something about her stillness, something that made her stand taller than every uniformed soldier around her. For a moment, no one noticed. Protocol demanded unwavering focus on the general, and focus is what they gave. But then Sergeant Major Ortega's voice cracked like a whip. "Civilian, salute your commanding officer." Every head turned. Emma did not flinch. The silence was unbearable, the kind that seems to magnify every heartbeat. 200 pairs of eyes now fixed on the one person who had broken the unspoken law of the military. Respect through ritual. General Caldwell paused mid-stride, the slightest crease forming between his brows. His boots echoed against the stone floor as he turned his head toward the disruption. Emma's gaze did not falter. Her lips parted, for words spilled out, soft but sharp enough to slice through the stillness. Not until he remembers Omega 7. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. A murmur rippled through the formation. Soldiers exchanged bewildered glances, their discipline fracturing under the weight of something they didn't understand. General Caldwell froze. His jaw tightened. His eyes, once cold and commanding, flickered with something no one had ever seen in him before: fear. A single breath seemed to stretch into eternity. Emma reached into her uniform, fingers brushing against a chain that had never left her neck. Dog tags. Old. Burnt around the edges. She let them dangle in the light just enough for the general to see. And in that instant, something shifted. The general, a man who had commanded thousands, who had stared down enemy fire without a tremor, raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and returned the salute. Gasps broke the silence. 200 soldiers stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold. A 4-starred general saluting a janitor. The hall seemed to stop breathing. And then, before anyone could speak, before anyone could even begin to make sense of what they had witnessed, Emma whispered, almost too softly to hear, "You remember." Darkness seemed to fall heavier in the room, though the sun still poured in through the glass. Whatever Omega 7 was, it had cracked open a secret that was never meant to see daylight. The ceremony was no longer just a ceremony. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. Pause. What could a forgotten name mean? Powerful enough to make a general salute the lowest-ranked worker on base. And what truth had Emma carried in silence for 8 long years? At Bravo Base, Emma Blackwell was a shadow. She drifted through the corridors when the world was asleep, her footsteps echoing softly against tiled floors at midnight. Soldiers joked that the walls cleaned themselves, because few had ever actually seen her mop the barracks or polish the brass nameplates that lined the hallways. She was there, and then she wasn't. Most people couldn't recall the sound of her voice. When they did, it was usually just 1 or 2 words, spoken in a tone so calm it barely rippled the air. She moved like someone who had spent years practicing invisibility. And it worked. For almost everyone. Almost. Staff Sergeant John Morrison wasn't like the others. He had been stationed at Bravo Base for years, and while most dismissed Emma as the night janitor, Morrison noticed things. Like the small tactical radio tucked between her cleaning supplies. Like the way she seemed to know which light bulbs were about to burn out before they did. Like the night she appeared out of nowhere when the server room crashed during a thunderstorm, fixing what 3 specialists had already declared beyond repair. That night, Morrison had asked, "How did you know what was wrong?" Emma, hands black with grease, had only said, "Equipment speaks. If you listen." Then she walked away, leaving Morrison staring after her with the uneasy feeling that the janitor understood military technology better than the officers trained to handle it. But the garden was stranger still. Behind the administrative building was a small patch of land, officially labeled as landscaping for morale. Everyone called it the Memorial Garden. Soldiers who had lost comrades would wander there at dawn or dusk, standing silently among the flowers and stones. Emma had claimed it as her own. Every morning before the sun rose, she could be found kneeling among the rows, dew dampening her uniform sleeves, her hands arranging petals with surgical precision. Every flower was placed like a note in a melody. Every stone lined up with impossible accuracy, forming patterns only the trained eye could recognize. And then there were the markers. 7 of them. Small granite slabs, unapproved, unrecorded, each engraved with only a number and a date, October 15th, 2016. 7 stones, set in a formation any soldier would recognize. A communications team spread across a tactical field. Private Daniel Torres once asked her about them. "Why 7?" he whispered as he helped her water the flowers one evening. Emma looked up at him, her eyes soft but unyielding. Because 7 people experienced that day differently than anyone else. Torres swallowed, realizing she wasn't going to say more. Something in her tone told him pushing would cross a line. So he didn't. He just knelt beside her, watering in silence. But the question gnawed at him. Why October 15th? Why those 7? And why did the date not exist in any military archive? Rumors spread quietly, as they always do in places where order and secrecy breed curiosity. "She's got some kind of clearance," one corporal whispered. "No, she's just eccentric," another replied. "Then why is she always listening to encrypted frequencies?" Morrison overheard those conversations often, and he'd lie awake at night, hearing Emma's words repeat in his head. "Equipment speaks, if you know how to listen." But Morrison's gut told him she wasn't just listening to equipment. She was listening for someone. Sergeant Major Ortega noticed her too. One dawn patrol, through a mist that hung low over the base, he spotted Emma sitting cross-legged in the garden. Her notebook, an old battered field log, rested on her knees. Her lips were moving, whispering words to no one, or to someone who wasn't there. "You're out here early," Ortega said softly, not wanting to startle her. Emma closed the notebook carefully, almost like she was tucking a secret back into a vault. She looked up at him. "Some conversations require privacy." Ortega frowned. "Anyone I might know?" She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head gently. "People you should know, but probably don't." Ortega walked away that morning with a chill running down his spine. It wasn't her words that haunted him. It was the look in her eyes. Eyes that carried the weight of someone who had seen war up close. Too close. The strange routines continued. Every night, her radio tuned, waiting for a call sign that never came. Every morning, her hands tending the garden as if each flower were a coded message. And every day, she disappeared into tunnels and equipment rooms where no one followed. She wasn't invisible. She was hiding. And when word spread that General Caldwell was coming to deliver the keynote at this year's memorial ceremony, on the exact anniversary of October 15th, Emma's mask cracked. Just for a moment, Morrison caught it. The way her hand instinctively rose to her throat, to the dog tags beneath her uniform. The way her shoulders stiffened, as if a ghost had brushed past her. "You know him, don't you?" Morrison asked later. Emma's eyes met his. Calm, steady. But the undertone of her reply cut deep. "I know his work. Impressive man. Lot of successful operations." Her gaze lingered, piercing, almost pitying. Success depends on how you measure it. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Morrison with a knot in his chest. Something was coming. Something tied to October 15th. something Emma had been carrying alone for 8 long years. And so, when the day of the ceremony arrived, the soldiers gathered with their polished boots, their pristine uniforms, and their polished memories of duty and honor. Emma stood quietly at the back, a ghost among them, a janitor in uniform only by fabric, not by presence. But soon, very soon, they would all learn the truth. And when they did, none of them would ever look at Emma Blackwell the same way again. Cliffhanger. The sense that Emma isn't just waiting for the general. She's been waiting for this exact day. October's sunlight has a way of feeling sharper, like glass cutting across the sky. That morning, Bravo Base woke to a brilliance that made the air almost too clear, too revealing, as if nothing could hide. Soldiers moved with unusual crispness, uniforms immaculate, medals polished, boots echoing in rhythm across the courtyard. The annual memorial ceremony always demanded perfection, but this year was different. This year, General Robert Caldwell himself was coming. For most of the base, his visit meant honor, pride, recognition from a decorated leader. For Emma Blackwell, it meant something else entirely. She had risen hours before dawn. In the memorial garden, mist clung to the granite markers like breath that refused to fade. Emma knelt among them, her fingers brushing dew from the flowers she had placed the night before. 7 stones. 7 ghosts. She opened her battered field notebook, the pages stained with time and use. Her pencil hovered, then scratched quietly across the paper. Not words, numbers, coordinates, frequencies, notes that would make sense only to someone who had once lived in the language of war. Her lips moved silently, reciting names, conversations no one else could hear. "You're still with me," she whispered, eyes closed, pressing her palm against one of the markers. "And today he will remember you." When the first rays of sunlight spilled over the garden, Emma closed the notebook, tucking it into her uniform. The moment was coming. She could feel it pressing against her ribs, steady and relentless like a drumbeat. Inside the base, preparations buzzed. Captain DeLuca, head of ceremony logistics, spotted Emma near the audio equipment. "Blackwell, we're getting feedback on the system again. Check it." "Already fixed." Her reply was calm, matter-of-fact. "Impedance mismatch in the auxiliary channels. Should be clear now." DeLuca frowned. "We only noticed that 20 minutes ago." "How?" Emma didn't look up. "I've been monitoring since yesterday. Equipment tells you what's wrong if you pay attention." He blinked, unsettled, but found the microphones perfectly balanced when tested. As always, she had solved the problem before anyone else even knew it existed. And, as always, she slipped back into the background before anyone could ask questions. The whispers grew louder among the soldiers. "Who is she really?" "Just a janitor." "No janitor knows encrypted radio frequencies. She spends more time in the tunnels than the engineers." Sergeant Morrison said nothing, but his eyes followed her. He remembered the way her hand had gone to her dog tags at the mention of Caldwell's name. He remembered her words. "Success depends on how you measure it." That morning, he caught her standing alone at the back of the hall, staring at the empty podium. Her posture was straight, almost military, though her uniform was grease-stained. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" he asked quietly. Emma turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Some things can't stay buried forever. Morrison felt a chill settle at the base of his spine. By noon, the assembly hall was alive with ceremony. Flags unfurled in perfect symmetry. Rows of chairs aligned with surgical precision. Memorial wreaths framed the stage. The air smelled faintly of polished brass and cold stone, the hall itself humming with restrained anticipation. Officers filled the front rows. Enlisted soldiers lined up behind them. Civilian staff and contractors, Emma among them, stood near the back. The hierarchy was flawless. Order incarnate. And yet, Emma stood like an anomaly, out of place, a patch of shadow at the edge of a carefully arranged picture. But she wasn't nervous. She was waiting. At precisely 1,400 hours, the general's staff car arrived. The assembly hall doors opened. General Caldwell stepped inside, his presence commanding the room instantly. His ribbons and decorations shimmered under the overhead lights, each one a reminder of decades of service. His face was carved in discipline, unreadable, the kind of face soldiers wanted to follow. Ladies and gentlemen, General Robert Caldwell, Commanding Officer, 3rd Infantry Division. Sergeant Major Ortega's voice rang out, sharp and reverent. 200 soldiers rose in perfect synchronization. Their right hands flew up in a single, practiced salute. The sound was almost audible, a rush of uniforms, the collective discipline of an entire base crystallized in one motion. All except one, Emma Blackwell. She stood at attention, her arms stiff at her sides, her eyes locked on the general. Not a muscle twitched. Morrison's breath caught in his throat. The silence around her was deafening. General Caldwell strode forward, nodding to the salutes, his boots echoing against the stone floor. The ceremony was unfolding with mechanical precision, until Lieutenant Bradley, stationed near the back, saw her. "You there," his voice cracked like thunder across the hall. "Civilian or not, you will salute the general." Every head turned. Emma did not move. Her eyes never left Caldwell. The general paused mid-step, turning to follow the disturbance. His gaze landed on her, and in that instant, a flicker passed across his face. So brief, most would have missed it. But Emma saw. Recognition. 200 soldiers stood frozen, caught in a silence, so sharp it seemed to cut the air. Emma's voice, calm but unwavering, broke it. "Not until he remembers Omega 7. The words slammed into the hall like a detonation. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Ortega's jaw clenched. Colonel Martinez, seated near the front, inhaled sharply, as if the name had punched the air from his lungs. And General Caldwell stopped moving altogether. His face drained of color. His hand trembled ever so slightly at his side. A silence heavier than stone settled over the hall. The ceremony wasn't a ceremony anymore. It was a reckoning. And everyone knew it. Cliffhanger. The secret has been spoken aloud. Omega 7. Everyone feels its weight, but only a few truly understand. Caldwell is shaken. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The echo of Emma's words, "Not until he remembers Omega 7, still vibrated in the silence like the fading ring of a bell. 200 soldiers stood locked in salute, their arms trembling under the weight of uncertainty. Omega 7, a name most had never heard. But the way it shattered General Caldwell's composure told them enough. This wasn't just a word. It was a wound. Lieutenant Bradley barked again, his voice sharp with indignation. "Blackwell, salute now." But Emma didn't even glance at him. She took a slow step forward, her boots clicking against the stone. Her hand reached beneath her maintenance uniform, and when it emerged, the air in the room shifted. Dog tags. Old. Scorched. The metal edges blackened as if they had survived fire. They dangled from her fist, trembling in the light. Her voice carried with the formal cadence of the military. "Technical Sergeant Emma Blackwell. Reporting 8 years late, sir." The silence broke like glass. Gasps swept through the hall. Some soldiers lowered their salutes without realizing. Morrison's eyes went wide. Ortega's jaw clenched. And Caldwell froze as if the ground itself had been ripped out from under him. He whispered, barely audible, "You're supposed to be dead." Emma placed the tags gently on the nearest table. The metallic clink rang louder than gunfire. "They belong to my team, sir. The team you declared Kia to protect your reputation." Colonel Martinez surged to his feet. "That's enough. Escort her." But Caldwell raised a trembling hand. "Stand down." His eyes never left hers. Emma's voice dropped, but every soldier in the hall felt it crawl into their chest. "You sent Omega 7 to die. Called it an intercept mission. Intelligence gathering. But we weren't meant to gather anything. We were bait. A suicide team." Caldwell's composure cracked further, though he tried to muster authority. "You don't know what you're talking about. Omega 7 encountered unexpected." "Stop." Emma's voice cut through like a blade. She reached again into her uniform and pulled out a small, battered device. Old, but unmistakably military grade. A field recorder. She held it in her palm like a live grenade. Would you like to hear your own voice giving those orders, General? The hall gasped again. Every eye locked onto the object. That's impossible, Martinez snapped. All communications from that period were destroyed. Emma's lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. Official communications, yes. But field operatives keep backups. Standard procedure. You know that, Colonel. She pressed a button, and the past came alive. Command to all units. A younger Caldwell's voice echoed through the hall, crisp and unmistakable. Omega-7 maintains current position regardless of casualty reports. Mission Priority Alpha takes precedence over personnel recovery. Repeat, Omega-7 is expendable for mission success. The words rolled like thunder. Soldiers shifted, eyes wide, the general's own voice condemning him in real time. Emma's hands trembled, but her voice did not. My team died, believing help was coming. I survived because I played dead for 14 hours while they used my friends' bodies for target practice. Her eyes flicked to the windows, where the memorial garden could be seen beyond. 7 markers. 7 names. All erased so you could claim victory clean. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, who had long suspected Emma's uncanny technical skills, hid something. Whispered hoarsely. You've been maintaining their memorial all this time. I've been maintaining their memory, Emma corrected, her voice raw but steady. Because nobody else would. Caldwell's voice cracked as he tried to reclaim control. The mission saved lives. Thousands. Refugee camps were spared because of the intelligence you transmitted. Emma's composure faltered just for a second. Her jaw clenched. My team chose to die protecting civilians. What they didn't choose was to be erased. What they didn't deserve was to have their commander bathe in the glory of their sacrifice while burying their existence. She pulled a bundle of folded envelopes from her pocket, setting them beside the tags. These came over the years. Letters sent to the unknown heroes of October 15th. Always forwarded to maintenance. Always ending up with me. Families thanking ghosts they didn't know by name. She pressed her hand flat against the stack. My team deserves to be more than ghosts. The soldiers in the hall no longer looked at Emma like a janitor. They looked at her like a survivor, like a witness. Morrison whispered to the soldier beside him, his voice hoarse with realization. The radio, she was always listening for distress calls. For someone who might need the rescue she never got. And in that moment, the truth of Emma Blackwell spread like wildfire across the assembly hall. She had never been invisible. She had been standing watch. A sentinel for the forgotten. General Caldwell closed his eyes. When he opened them, the iron mask of command had fallen away. His shoulders sagged, and in his face was something soldiers had never seen before. Guilt. He stepped forward, slowly, every footstep echoing in the hall like judgment itself. Technical Sergeant Blackwell, he said, his voice stripped bare. Your team completed their mission with distinction. Their sacrifice saved lives, and they will be remembered. He turned sharply toward Martinez. Colonel, process immediate declassification. Records, commendations, memorials, all of it. Martinez stammered. Sir, that requires. That's an order. The general straightened again, his hand rising in a perfect regulation salute. Technical Sergeant Blackwell, it is my honor to salute you. Gasps rippled through the hall. 200 soldiers stood frozen, watching their highest commander salute the lowest-ranking figure in the room. And then one by one they followed. Hands rose in waves. 200 salutes, not for Caldwell, not for protocol, but for Emma Blackwell, the ghost who had carried the weight of truth for 8 years. Emma didn't return the salute. She gathered the dog tags from the table, pressed them once to her chest, and then placed them on the memorial podium at the front. These don't belong to me anymore. They belong to history. Make sure history gets their names right. She turned toward the exit, her footsteps echoing like the last words of a prayer. At the doorway, she paused. The memorial garden has 7 markers because 7 people experienced October 15th differently than everyone else. Tomorrow, it should have 7 names. And then she was gone, leaving behind silence, so heavy it felt eternal. Cliffhanger. The truth is out. Caldwell has saluted. But Emma has vanished into the shadows once more. The memorial garden changed first. Within a week, stonecutters arrived under quiet orders. Soldiers stood watch as names were etched into granite, the sound of chisel against stone carrying across the courtyard like thunder. The 7 blank markers Emma had guarded for 8 years were reborn. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, Staff Sergeant David Kim, Corporal Jennifer Liu, Private First Class Michael Torres, Specialist Amanda Wright, Private Jose Rodriguez, Communications Specialist Rachel Ford. 7 names, carved in stone at last. 7 ghosts finally called home. When the work was finished, the formation Emma had so carefully preserved remained untouched. 7 markers still aligned in tactical spread. Flowers still arranged with mathematical grace. But now the granite spoke not with silence, but with truth. Visitors no longer had to wonder. They could read. They could remember. And above them all, one inscription was added. Omega 7. Their silence saved the living. The declassified files followed. General Caldwell himself signed the release. His name etched into the record not as the man who buried Omega 7, but as the man who finally resurrected their memory. The official report told the story in words the world could understand. A small team, knowingly sacrificed to transmit false intelligence, buying time to save over 200 civilians trapped in refugee camps. For the first time, the military acknowledged the truth. Those soldiers had not failed. They had succeeded by dying. And yet, in the footnotes, in the quiet corners of the record, Emma's name appeared only once. Technical Sergeant Emma Blackwell. Survivor. The rest of her story was left untold. At Bravo Base, life carried on. New recruits arrived, saluted, drilled. But something in the culture shifted. Soldiers began to look at the cooks, the mechanics, the medics, the janitors differently. Whispers spread. Don't dismiss the quiet ones. Don't assume you know their battles. Morrison caught himself often, standing at the edge of the garden in the early mornings, staring at the 7 markers. He remembered Emma's words, spoken like a vow. I became invisible, so their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. Now, she was invisible again. Her maintenance quarters were empty, tools neatly arranged, shelves spotless. Only a single note sat on the workbench, penned in her sharp, disciplined hand. General Caldwell retired months later. Some said he had been broken by Emma's return. Others whispered he had finally found the humility that had always eluded him. He used his retirement to build a foundation, one dedicated to families of soldiers lost in classified operations. A promise that no one would be erased again. When asked why, he always gave the same answer. Because 7 soldiers taught me the difference between orders and truth. But Emma became a legend. On quiet mornings, soldiers swore they saw her in the garden. A slim figure in a faded maintenance uniform, tending the flowers with her hands. She never spoke, never stayed long. But when she left, the petals always seemed brighter, the stones cleaner, the formation more precise. No one ever approached her. No one dared. Because whether real or ghost, Emma Blackwell belonged to Omega 7 now. And maybe she always had. The memorial ceremony changed, too. Each October 15th, soldiers gathered not just to honor the fallen in uniform, but to remember those who carried unseen burdens in silence. Speeches ended not with protocol, but with reflection. Sometimes the strongest salute is the one withheld. Sometimes the truest loyalty is silence. And sometimes the bravest soldier isn't the one who stands in front of us, but the one who stands in the shadows, unseen. In the end, the lesson Emma left behind was simple. Leadership isn't about glory. Sacrifice isn't about recognition. And sometimes the most powerful salute a general can give is to the janitor who never stopped serving. The camera of the mind pulls back, drifting away from Bravo Base, the garden, the stones. The wind stirs through the flowers, whispering across 7 names carved at last. And a question lingers in the silence, waiting to be answered. If you were in Emma's place, Would you have stayed silent for 8 years to protect the mission? Or would you have spoken out sooner, no matter the cost?